The studio lights held steady at 3:47 in the afternoon, and the quiet was the kind that builds before a door opens. Jasmine Crockett sat with her hands folded on the table, not moving, not smiling, watching the door like someone who already knows the next move before it arrives. Behind the camera, the crew had stopped adjusting equipment. The hum of the fluorescent lights was the only sound left in the room. Then the door opened. Ivanka Trump walked in wearing a cream blazer with 3 buttons, her hair pulled back tight, her heels clicking against the studio floor in the rhythm of someone who had rehearsed that entrance. She smiled for the camera before she sat down. Not a real smile. The kind of smile that is a performance of a smile, placed on the face like an accessory, worn to convey warmth while the eyes stayed cool and distant. She set her water glass down on the table, poured it herself from a bottle she had brought, declined the glass the studio offered, small choices, every one of them deliberate, a quiet way of saying I don't trust what hasn't been approved. She looked at Jasmine, took her time doing it. Slow and thorough, like a jeweler examining a stone to determine if it was real or fake. "You're shorter than I expected," Ivanka said. The room did not move. Not a single person reacted. The producer behind the monitor pressed a button to keep the room quiet. No laugh track, no music, just the hum. The silence lasted for 9 seconds. The kind of 9 seconds that feels like an hour when you are sitting across from someone who just decided to establish dominance before the cameras even started rolling. The producer looked at the clock. 9 seconds. In a format where every second counts, where the metrics track engagement in real time, 9 seconds of dead air was an eternity. But she did not cut. She did not move. She let it sit. Because she knew what was happening. She had seen it before. The first strike in a negotiation is rarely the one that lands. The first strike is the one that sets the tone. The first strike says I am the one who decides what happens in this room. The first strike is a claim of territory, like a dog urinating on a fire hydrant, like a general planting a flag on a hill before the battle has even begun. Ivanka had been doing this since she was a teenager. She knew the rhythm. She knew the weight of the pause. She knew that a room full of strangers could be trained to watch her if she simply convinced them in the first 30 seconds that she was the most important person in it. But something was different this time. Jasmine did not react to the comment about her height, did not blush, did not defend herself, did not offer a joke to smooth it over. She simply looked at Ivanka with the kind of calm that is not the absence of emotion but the product of it. The calm of someone who has decided not to perform. The calm of someone who has already seen this moment and understood what it was. This is the part most people miss when they watch this interview for the first time. They see the exchange and they think the confrontation began with a question about the border. But it started here, in these 9 seconds, in the space between Ivanka's insult and Jasmine's silence. Because Ivanka had made her first move, and Jasmine had declined to engage, and in that decline something shifted, not visibly, not dramatically, but in the way a room shifts when the ground underneath it turns out to be different than everyone expected. The producer leaned back in her chair. She had been worried about this segment, worried that it would become another scripted exchange, another two-person argument designed to generate heat without light, another piece of content that would run for 48 hours and disappear without leaving anything behind. But this was not that. She did not know what this was yet, but it was not that. But to understand how Jasmine sat perfectly still in that chair 43 minutes later, how her voice never rose above the level of a quiet conversation, how the room went so quiet that the clock on the wall became the loudest thing in it, we have to go back to the moment she walked into this studio an hour earlier. We have to go back to the moment she knew what was coming. And we have to go back further than that, to the call that changed everything. Jasmine had received the call 3 days before the interview. A producer from the network had been careful with the words, careful the way people are careful when they are delivering a message they did not write and do not fully believe. The kind of careful that shows up in the pause before a sentence, in the slight softening of a consonant, in the way someone says they're very excited when what they mean is I was told to ask you this, and I hope you say no. They want to do a joint interview, the producer said. You and Ivanka on the same set, no separate segments, same co. Opposite sides, Jasmine asked. Split screen, but you're in the same room. They'll frame it as a conversation, a dialogue. Jasmine was quiet for a moment. She had done 100 interviews. She knew what this was. Two people on opposite ends of a political divide placed in the same room, and the producers would push until something sparked. The ratings lived in the friction. The subscribers came from the friction. The whole architecture of the format was built on the assumption that conflict was the only honest form of communication. And she also knew something else, something the producer probably did not know or did not want to know. This was not a neutral request. This was not a network looking for balance. This was a campaign to position Ivanka as a relevant figure in a political conversation that had moved past her. A way of using Jasmine's platform to rehabilitate a brand that had taken damage in the years since her father had left office. A quiet reset disguised as a debate. "Who requested me specifically?" Jasmine asked. The producer hesitated. That pause told the whole story. In media, the pause before an answer is sometimes more honest than the answer itself. The pause says, "I am deciding how much to tell you." The pause says, "I know something you should probably know, but I have been told not to say it directly." Ms. Trump did. Jasmine set her coffee down on her desk. She looked at the window. The city was moving outside, people going places, doing things, living lives that did not include being placed across from someone who had been trained since birth to win every room she entered. A training that had started in boarding schools and continued through boardrooms and fashion empires and White House offices and political campaigns that never quite worked out the way the strategists had promised they would. She said yes. Not because she wanted the confrontation, not because she was hungry for a fight, not because she saw this as an opportunity to score points or generate content or build her following on the back of someone else's visibility. She said yes because she understood something the producer did not, something Ivanka probably did not either. The trap was not the room, the trap was the frame. If you let the other person decide what the conversation is about, you have already lost. The frame tells the audience what to see. The frame decides who looks strong and who looks desperate. The frame makes the rules before the first word is spoken. And Ivanka's team had built this frame very carefully. They had designed it to showcase her poise and diminish anyone placed across from her. They had designed it so that any attack on her would look like aggression, and any failure to attack would look like weakness. They had designed it so that Jasmine could not win no matter what she did. But that was only true if Jasmine accepted the frame. If she played by the rules that had been written for her, if she let the narrative be about her reaction to Ivanka instead of about the truth that Ivanka had been avoiding. There was another way to play this, not the way the producers expected, not the way the cable news chyrons would frame it afterward, a different way, a quieter way. The kind of way that makes people lean forward instead of clicking away. Jasmine spent the next 3 days preparing, not the way a boxer prepares for a fight, not with anger and aggression and the hunger to land a blow that will knock the other person down and keep them down. She prepared the way an architect studies a building before deciding whether to renovate it or tear it down. She studied the structure. She looked for the load-bearing walls. She looked for the places where the weight was distributed, and the places where it was concentrated, and the places where a single well-placed question could shift the entire foundation. She read everything Ivanka had said in the past 18 months. Every interview, every public statement, every comment made at a fundraiser or a press conference or a podcast appearance where the host was too dazzled to ask hard questions. She read the transcript of the congressional testimony. She read the deposition from the civil case. She read the email chains that had been released through FOIA requests, the ones that nobody had paid attention to because they were buried in PDF attachments that were too long for anyone to finish. She was not looking for the contradiction she could exploit. That was what the cable news people would expect. That was the game they knew how to play. Point out a contradiction, demand an answer, move on to the next segment. It generated heat. It did not generate light. It produced content. It did not produce understanding. She was looking for the moment when Ivanka had told the truth, because that was where the strength lived. That was where the trap could be built. Because if you want to hold a mirror up to someone, you have to first find the reflection they cannot deny. You have to find the moment when they were honest, and then show them what they have done since that moment. You have to find the gap between who they said they were and who they actually became. The gap is where the power lives. On the morning of the interview, she put on a dark jacket with a single button. She left the second button open. She did not do her hair in a new way. She did not wear anything that would distract from what she was going to say. She was not trying to win a costume contest. She was not trying to look more polished than someone who had a team of stylists and a clothing allowance that exceeded most people's rent. She was trying to win an argument. And the argument was never going to be won on the surface level. The argument was always going to be won in the space beneath the performance. She arrived at the studio 40 minutes early, sat in her chair, drank water, did not look at her phone. The room was quiet and she let it stay quiet. She knew what she was doing. Every second of silence before the interview began was a second she was not giving away. Every moment of stillness was a moment the audience would feel without knowing why. The crew noticed, the producer noticed. Nobody said anything, but the energy in the room had started to shift. The crew members who had been checking their phones put them away. The producer who had been answering emails closed her laptop. Something was happening in the room, something they could not name yet, but they could feel it. The way you can feel a storm approaching even when the sky is still clear. And then Ivanka walked in. The first 11 minutes were smooth, controlled. The interviewer asked questions about policy and positioning, and both women answered in polished, rehearsed phrases. Ivanka spoke about opportunity and growth. Jasmine spoke about equity and accountability. They disagreed, but the disagreement was performed disagreement, the kind where both people have agreed in advance how far they are willing to go. It was theater. It was comfortable. The audience at home was probably checking their phones. Ivanka was winning the surface level. She had the better hair, the more expensive blazer. The camera loved her angles. She had the kind of presence that photographers described as regal in the captions they wrote for the photos that would run in the morning. She was doing everything right according to every metric the industry used to measure who was winning a television segment. Her answers were longer. Her gestures were larger. She leaned forward when she made a point and leaned back when she wanted to let it land. She was performing competence and confidence in equal measure, and the performance was flawless. The producer behind the monitor was taking notes. 17 minutes. That's what the data said. People stayed engaged for an average of 17 minutes before their attention started to drift. The interview was designed to build to a climax around minute 22. That was when the hard question would come. The one that had been approved by both teams but framed in a way that would make it seem spontaneous. The one that would force a moment of vulnerability and turn the whole thing into the kind of content that runs on loops and generates shares. But the hard question came early, not because the interviewer decided to deviate from the script, but because something in the room had shifted. The energy had changed. The silence before Ivanka walked in had done something to the space that the producers had not anticipated. It had created a kind of pressure, a sense that something was being held in reserve, a sense that the real conversation had not started yet. And the interviewer, who had been trained to follow the energy of a room, decided to give it what it was waiting for. The interviewer asked a question about the border. Not a simple question, a specific one, about a decision made 6 years ago that had been documented in a congressional record, about a quote that had been attributed to someone in the administration at the time, about a contradiction between what had been said publicly and what had been said in a closed-door meeting. The room went still, not the performing stillness of a held breath, the real stillness of a room that does not know what to do with what it just heard. Ivanka's answer was smooth. She pivoted. She reframed. She talked about the economy. She talked about opportunity zones. She talked about her father's commitment to the American worker in a way that made the question feel like a misunderstanding, like the interviewer had simply missed the point. Her answer was a perfect example of what media trainers call bridging, the technique of acknowledging a question without answering it and pivoting to a message that has been pre-approved by the communications team. It was masterful. It was rehearsed. It was the kind of answer that would play well on cable news and generate quote tweets from people who already agreed with her position. And then she made a mistake. She turned to Jasmine, directly, pointedly, the way someone does when they have decided to stop performing for the room and start performing at a specific person. The way a boxer steps out of the ring and walks towards someone in the crowd. The way a general stops talking to the diplomats and turns to face the enemy army. The room felt it before she spoke. The temperature dropped. The hum of the lights became louder. Someone in the crew shifted in their chair, and the creak of the upholstery sounded like a gunshot in the silence. "You would know something about missed points, wouldn't you, Congresswoman?" Ivanka's voice was warm, friendly almost. The voice of someone who is delivering a compliment wrapped in an insult, a gift wrapped in thorns. She smiled as she said it. The kind of smile that does not reach the eyes but reaches for them anyway, that tries to pull the audience into the performance by making them complicit in the cruelty. You've spent your entire career missing the point. The point is growth. The point is opportunity. The point is that my father created more jobs in 4 years than your entire party has created in 50. The room went still. The lights buzzed. Somewhere behind the camera, a floor mat creaked under someone's shifting weight. The clock on the wall read 8:22. Ivanka smiled. She had landed the blow. She knew it. The cameras knew it. The producer behind the monitor knew it. This was the moment the segment had been designed to create. This was the payoff. The clip that would run on every show by morning. The sound bite that would be played so many times it would lose all meaning and then gain a new one through sheer repetition. She leaned back in her chair, adjusted her blazer. Let the silence breathe. Let the room sit with what she had just said. Let the audience at home feel the weight of the moment, the kind of moment that gets clipped and shared and runs in the loop that drives the next day's coverage. 19 seconds passed. In a media format where every second is tracked and measured and optimized, 19 seconds is an eternity. 19 seconds is the length of a commercial break. 19 seconds is the time it takes to decide whether to keep watching or move on to something else. 19 seconds is a small eternity when you have just asked a question you expect to be answered immediately. But Jasmine did not move, did not react, did not flinch. She simply looked at Ivanka with the kind of calm that is not the absence of emotion but the product of it, the calm of someone who has decided not to perform, the calm of someone who has already seen this moment and understood what it was. Ivanka waited. Her smile stayed in place, but something behind the smile had started to shift. A small crack in the performance, the beginning of the recognition that the moment was not going the way she had planned. And then Jasmine spoke. "Your father," Jasmine said, "stood in front of a group of CEOs at a fundraiser in 2016 and told them that immigrants were taking jobs that Americans would not do." The words came out quiet, measured, not aggressive, not theatrical, the voice of someone reading a document in a courtroom. The voice of someone who has decided that facts are more powerful than feelings and that truth is more durable than performance. "I know because I watched the footage, not the edited version, the full version. The one where he leaned into the microphone and said that American workers had become soft, that they wanted the good jobs without doing the hard work, and that immigrants were willing to do what nobody in this country would do anymore." She paused, let the room breathe. This is the moment where most people would push harder, pile on, turn the advantage into a victory lap, show the audience how much stronger they are than the person who tried to hurt them. But Jasmine was not most people. She was waiting. "The point you keep missing," Jasmine said, "is not that opportunity exists. Everyone agrees opportunity exists. The question is who gets to access it. The question is who builds the path and who gets to walk on it." The silence that followed was different from the silence that had come before. Earlier silences had been about power, about who controlled the room, about who could make the other person wait. This silence was about something else. This silence was about recognition. "Your father did not create opportunity. He created an opportunity structure, and that structure had a gate, and you decided who got through the gate." The room had gone silent, not the performing silence of a held breath, the real silence of a room that does not know what to do with what it just heard. The crew had stopped moving. The cameras were still rolling, but no one was watching them. The producer behind the monitor had her hand over her mouth, not in shock, in recognition. In the kind of recognition that comes from watching something you did not expect to see but somehow knew was always going to happen. Ivanka's smile was still there, but it had changed. It had become the kind of smile that is held in place by muscle memory rather than confidence. The smile of someone who has realized, in real time, that the frame they built has been turned into a mirror. The smile of someone who has been shown their own reflection and does not recognize what they are seeing. She opened her mouth to respond, closed it, opened it again. The clock on the wall read 8:29. Ivanka looked down at her water glass, picked it up, set it down without drinking, adjusted the button on her blazer, small movements. The kind of movements a person makes when they need to do something with their hands because the conversation has moved to a place they did not plan to go. The silence lasted for 14 seconds. In those 14 seconds, something happened that the cameras captured, but that the commentary would miss. Ivanka's eyes moved to the folder on the table. The folder she had brought with her, the one with the talking points and THE Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, and the prepared responses to questions that had been anticipated and answered before they were asked. The folder that was supposed to be the safety net, the lifeline, the escape route when the conversation went somewhere uncomfortable. She did not open it. She looked at it. She looked at it the way someone looks at a plan that has stopped working. The way a chess player looks at a move they thought was brilliant and now realizes was a mistake. Jasmine did not push, did not continue, did not add a second blow to the first. She let the silence sit, let the room absorb what had just happened, let Ivanka sit with it. This is the part most people miss when they watch this interview for the first time. They see the exchange and they think the confrontation was the moment of the quote. But the real moment is what comes after. The moment where Jasmine could have kept going, could have piled on, could have turned the advantage into a victory lap, and chose instead to stay silent. That choice is where the power lives. That choice is the thing that cannot be spun or reframed or edited into something it was not. The choice to stay quiet when you have the floor is the hardest thing in the world, and Jasmine made it look easy. The narrator might say that the quiet in that studio was the kind that builds communities like the one watching this channel. The quiet was not empty. It was full of something being understood. It was the kind of moment that happens when someone stops performing and starts being present. When someone stops trying to win and starts telling the truth. When someone decides that the audience does not need to be entertained, they need to be shown something real. The interviewer tried to move forward, tried to ask a follow-up question, tried to give both women a chance to respond to what had just happened. But the room was not ready. The audience at home was not ready. The whole structure of the segment had shifted beneath everyone's feet and nobody knew how to proceed. The producer behind the monitor made a decision. She gave the interviewer a signal, a small hand gesture. The interview would continue, but the questions would be softer now. The format would shift. The producers had realized in real time that they had captured something they did not have a category for, something that did not fit into the political debate format they had designed, something that was closer to a confession than an argument. The remaining minutes of the interview were almost gentle. The interviewer asked questions that both women could answer without conflict. Ivanka spoke about her work with women entrepreneurs. Jasmine spoke about her committee assignments. They agreed on things, small things, the kind of things that do not generate headlines but that make an interview feel like a conversation instead of a battlefield. But the damage had already been done. The moment had already happened. The 16 seconds of silence after Jasmine's response, the clock on the wall, the folder that nobody opened, the smile that froze and stayed frozen, the way Ivanka looked at the table instead of at the camera. These were the things that would stay with people after the words had faded. These were the things that could not be unsaid or rewritten or reframed. When the interviewer finally called for a break, the room exhaled. The crew stood up. The producer walked over to the monitors to check the footage. Someone brought water bottles to both women. Ivanka did not drink hers. She picked it up, held it, set it down without opening it. The same gesture she had made with the studio glass hours earlier, but different now. Before, it had been a claim of control, a small way of saying, "I don't need what you're offering." Now it was something else, a way of occupying her hands while her mind tried to process what had just happened. Jasmine drank her water, slowly, calmly, the way someone drinks water after a long run, not because they are exhausted, because they have finished something and are ready to move on. This is the part of the story where most summaries would focus on what happened next. The statements, the reactions, the spin, the way each side would try to frame what had occurred in terms that were favorable to their position. But that is not the important part. That is the noise that covers the signal. The important part is what happened in the room, the specific things, the concrete details, the folder that was never opened, the water glass that was never used, the clock on the wall that read 8:29 for the longest 16 seconds of anyone's life. The important part is that one person told the truth and one person tried to win an argument and the truth won. Not because it was louder, not because it was more polished, not because it had better hair or a better blazer or a better team of strategists telling them what to say, because it was true. After the interview, the producers would try to get sound bites, clips, the kind of content that runs on loops and generates engagement and drives the next cycle of coverage. But the cameras had captured something they could not use, a moment of stillness where the story had already been told, a silence that said more than any quote they could extract. The producer called her editor, told them to pull the footage of the 16 seconds. The 16 seconds after Jasmine finished speaking. The 16 seconds where nothing happened and everything changed. She did not know yet what she was going to do with it. She only knew that it was the most important thing in the interview and that it would be almost impossible to package for a format that required sound bites and conflict and momentum. Ivanka's team would release a statement within the hour, a careful statement, a statement that used words like focus on policy and substantive debate and respectful exchange. Words that acknowledged what had happened without admitting that anything had gone wrong. The language of damage control. The language of someone who has learned, from a very young age, how to spin a moment that did not go according to plan. But inside the studio, in the minutes after the cameras stopped rolling, something different happened. Ivanka stood up, buttoned her blazer, adjusted her hair in the reflection of her water glass, a small gesture that people do when they need a moment to compose themselves. She looked at Jasmine one more time, not with anger, not with resentment, with something else, something harder to name. "No comment," Ivanka said. Not to Jasmine, not to anyone in particular, just a statement made to the room. A line delivered to no audience, which is the only kind of line that is ever truly honest. Because when you are talking to an audience, you are always performing, even when you think you are not. Even when you believe you are being spontaneous and real, you are still watching yourself from the outside, still managing the impression you are making, still controlling the narrative even when you think you are letting it go. But when you speak to no one, when you say something into an empty room and no one is there to hear it, you have the luxury of honesty. You can say the thing you actually think. You can admit the thing you cannot admit in public. Ivanka's no comment was not a refusal to engage. It was an admission that she did not have a comment, that she did not have words for what had just happened, that she had walked into a room thinking she knew how the story would end and discovered that the room had other plans. She walked to the door, clicked across the floor in her heels, opened the door, closed it behind her. Jasmine stayed in her chair. She looked at the empty chair across the table. The water glass Ivanka had brought was still there. The bottle she had declined to use was still sealed. Small evidence, the archaeology of a moment, the artifacts that would remain after everyone had gone home and the room had been reset for the next guest. The producer came over the intercom, asked if she was okay, asked if she wanted anything, asked if she was ready to do a solo follow-up segment. Jasmine said no to all three questions. She sat for another moment in the quiet. She thought about what had just happened, not about who had won, not about what it would mean for the coverage, not about what people would say online or how the chyrons would frame it or whether the clip would go viral or fade into the feed like everything else eventually does. She thought about the fact that Ivanka had come into that room believing she had already won, that the format had been built around her presence, that the frame had been designed by her team and Agar. Ed to by the producers because her name opened doors that other names could not open. She had walked in certain of the outcome, certain the way people are certain when they have been told, for their entire life, that they are the most important person in every room they enter. Certain the way people are certain when they have never been shown evidence to the contrary. And she had been wrong. Not because Jasmine was smarter, not because Jasmine had prepared more, not because Jasmine had a better argument or a better team or a better strategy. Not because Jasmine had more money or better hair or a more expensive blazer or a longer list of credentials. Because Jasmine had understood something fundamental about the nature of the confrontation itself. Ivanka had come to win a debate. Jasmine had come to tell the truth. Those are not the same thing. And when you are in a room with someone who has confused those two things, the person who is trying to tell the truth will always eventually win. Not every time, not every day, not in every room and every format and every context where power is distributed unevenly and the cards are stacked and the deck is weighted. But in the long run, in the wide view, in the way history eventually sorts these moments into their proper categories, the person who is telling the truth will be the one who still has something to say when the room goes quiet. Ivanka had nothing left. The spin was already done. The damage control was already in motion. By the time the statement went out, the moment was already being reframed, the narrative already being rebuilt, the story already being rewritten to fit the shape of what the team needed it to be. But the footage was already out there. The silence was already in it. The clock on the wall was still reading 8:29 when the cameras went dark. The truth does not need a press release. It does not need a team of strategists or a crisis communications consultant or a carefully worded statement that uses the word respectful 14 times in 3 paragraphs. It just needs someone willing to sit still long enough to let it speak. Jasmine stood up. She picked up her own water glass. She walked to the door. The crew was already packing equipment. The producer was already on the phone with the network. The story was already being written, somewhere, by someone who had watched the footage and understood that the most powerful moment in the room had been the 16 seconds when nobody said anything at all. She opened the door, closed it behind her. The hallway was quiet. The light was different here, harder and more honest. No cameras, no audience, no frame to tell you what to see. She walked toward it. That night, the late-night hosts would get the footage first. They always did. The producers who worked the circuit knew that the fastest path to a good clip was to get it into the hands of people who knew how to use it. The people who had spent decades figuring out how to take a moment and turn it into a joke, or a commentary, or a lesson that was disguised as entertainment. Letterman would make a quiet joke about the silence, a throwaway line. "I don't know what happened there, but I'm pretty sure someone just won." The kind of joke that lets the audience feel smart for catching what he was really saying. The kind of joke that works because it does not try too hard. Colbert would replay the moment with the clock on the wall. The 16 seconds. He would slow it down. He would add music. He would make it into a short film about the nature of silence and the power of restraint and the strange alchemy that happens when someone decides not to perform. He would do it better than anyone else could have done it, because he understood that the best comedy comes from the same place as the best truth. Kimmel would ask his audience what they thought had happened, which was a way of letting the audience tell each other what to think. A way of creating a conversation that would spread through the network effect of shared opinions and validated reactions and the deep human need to be part of something that other people are also part of. Fallon would do a warm-up segment that made it seem like the whole thing was a big fun story, which was the gentlest way of diffusing what had actually been a precise and surgical moment. The kind of diffusing that protects everyone involved, including the audience, from having to sit with something too heavy for a late-night format. The takes would be parsed. The quotes would be run through the algorithm that determined which ones would spread and which ones would not. The algorithm did not care about context or nuance or the actual meaning of what had been said. The algorithm cared about engagement, about shares, about the metric that was being optimized for even though nobody could agree on whether it was the right one. Ivanka's team would issue 3 more statements before midnight. The state. Mentz would use different words but say the same thing. The thing that damage control always says. The thing that says this did not happen the way you think it happened even though the footage is right there and everyone has seen it. The commentators would line up on both sides of the argument, each one claiming the moment as a victory for their own side. The cable news chyrons would simplify it into a single word or phrase that captured nothing about what had actually happened but was easy to read on a screen while cooking dinner. Crockett versus Trump, the chyrons would say. On-air clash. Battle of the Blazers. And somewhere in all of that noise, a few people would watch the full interview. Not the clips, not the commentary, not the curated excerpts designed to confirm what people already believed. Just the interview, the whole thing. The 11 minutes of performed disagreement and the 2 minutes of real conversation and the 16 seconds of silence that followed. They would see what happened, and they would understand, maybe for the first time, what it looks like when someone walks into a room certain they have already won and discovers that the room had other plans. The power was never in the blazer. The power was never in the heels or the hair or the perfect smile or the rehearsed confidence or the team of strategists whose job it was to make sure the frame was built in the right direction. The power was in the quiet. The power was in the willingness to sit still and let the truth do the work. And that is a lesson that does not expire. That does not lose its relevance when the news cycle moves on and the algorithms reset and the coverage starts over with a new story that will itself be forgotten within a week. It stays, because the truth, in the end, is the only thing that does. The next morning, Ivanka's plane was boarding for New York. She had a speaking engagement at a financial conference, a panel discussion about leadership and legacy. She had done this panel 3 times before. The questions were predictable. The answers were prepared. The room would be full of people who wanted to be seen with her more than they wanted to hear what she had to say. She sat in her seat, The plane was quiet. The engines had not started yet. She looked out the window at the tarmac. The sun was coming up. The light was different here than it was in the studio. Less controlled, less designed. The kind of light that just exists without anyone deciding what it should look like. Her phone buzzed. A message from an assistant. A reminder about the panel, talking points attached. Key phrases highlighted. The same phrases she had used 3 times before, which meant they were probably the same phrases her father had used in some earlier version of the same conversation. She set the phone down, did not open the attachment. The flight attendant came through the cabin, closing overhead bins, checking seatbelts, going through the checklist that exists to make sure nothing goes wrong. The routine of movement, the choreography of normal. Ivanka thought about the studio, the quiet, the clock on the wall, the water glass she had brought and never opened. She thought about the way Jasmine had looked at her, not with anger, not with triumph, just with a kind of clarity that made it impossible to pretend the moment had not been what it was. That was the thing she could not spin. Not the quote, not the counter-argument, not the way the room had shifted in those 2 minutes of real conversation. The thing she could not spin was the way Jasmine had let the silence speak, the way she had not needed to shout, the way she had not needed to win. The way she had simply told the truth and walked away from the room knowing that the truth was enough. Ivanka had been raised on a different lesson. She had been raised on the lesson of the frame, on the lesson of the narrative, on the lesson that the story you build is more powerful than the facts you present because most people never check the facts. She had won 100 rooms with that lesson, maybe 1,000, maybe more than she could count, because winning had become so routine that she had stopped keeping track of it. Winning was the water she swam in. Winning was the air she breathed. Winning was the thing that happened when she walked into a room, the thing that was assumed before anyone said a word, the thing that other people oriented themselves around like a gravitational center that she did not have to earn because it was simply there. But this room had been different, because this room had a witness. This room had cameras. This room had been set up specifically so that the moment could not be edited out or reframed or spun into something that never happened. The truth was in the footage, and the footage was already out there. The engine started. The plane began to move. The tarmac slid past the window in the slow rhythm of a taxi to the runway. Ivanka closed her eyes, not to sleep, not to think, just to close them. The world outside was waking up. The news cycle was starting over. The algorithms were resetting. The takes were being written. The coverage was being built. But somewhere in a studio that smelled like dust and old carpet and the faint hum of fluorescent lights, the clock on the wall still read 8:29. And the silence was still there. Waiting. The panel would go well. The prepared phrases would land. The audience would applaud at the right moments. The photographs would run in the morning with captions that used words like powerful and articulate and compelling. The metrics would show engagement and shares and all the things that are measured to determine whether something was successful. Ivanka would do everything right. And somewhere in a different city, Jasmine would be preparing for a different room. Not because she was chasing the moment or trying to recreate what had happened or hoping to capture lightning in a bottle a second time, but because this was what she did. This was who she was. She prepared for rooms the way an architect prepares for buildings. She studied the structure. She looked for the load-bearing walls. She looked for the places where the weight was distributed, and the places where it was concentrated, and the places where a single well-placed question could shift the entire foundation. She did not need to win. She only needed to tell the truth. And the truth, unlike the performance, did not require rehearsal. The truth just required presence. The willingness to show up and say the thing that was real and trust that it would be enough. It usually was. It was today. And it will be again tomorrow.